Hey everybody, welcome to part 2 of Research Methodology in Practice. So as you remember, we talked about surveys, interviews, and focus groups in part 1, as well as overall practice with qualitative methods to assess community issues. So in part 2, we're going to go through some other methods that you may find useful in the work that you do in sociology and criminology. So let's get started. Using public records and archival data. So again, this is a very easy way to demonstrate outcomes are being met when you see changes that come through just data sources that you can go kind of scour and mine for changes that are happening out in the community. It's very laborious. It takes a lot of effort to do, but it's data that's there and it's just a gold mine to have. So what are public records and archival data? Well, essentially, they're public records of a public entity, so it can be data from the county, city, state, or nation that are available to the public by law. So you have to request copies of these, and you need to build that into your evaluation timeline if it takes a while to retrieve all that data. So it's really an archive, a storehouse, literal and or electronic, of print and other material that has been kept to preserve the history of the body or the place they relate to. So it really documents the population. It can be all kinds of stuff. It can be tax rolls. It can be addresses. It can be rates or frequencies of certain kinds of transactions that happen. It can be all kinds of stuff. I mean, it's just really, really fun to get into public records and archival data. So why use public records and archival data? Well, they're relatively easy for most people to gain access to. Usually you just need a public information request to do it, and you can get access to it because by law, you are entitled to get those records. They can give you information about the history or the status of the community that would be difficult to get elsewhere or in some other method. They can provide a really great baseline for you to start your research so you know where you're starting from and where you're trying to get to. They often make comparisons of your community with others, especially if you're doing a project over a large population and you want to see if maybe one area is doing better than another, then you can make those comparisons using archival data. They help you use your time really efficiently because it's kind of data ready to go. Their information may keep you from making important mistakes because they're kind of static in what's being collected, and they're kind of ready to go out of the box. They're also part of an information package that will give you the most accurate and complete picture of the aspects of the community that you're concerned with. So they're very descriptive in nature, and again, an excellent baseline for research. So who should use public records and archival data and when? Well, any group or individual involved in community assessment, you're doing big projects for your organization, your employer, or running a grant project. Go get some public data. It's free by law, you can get it, and it gives you the baseline. Community activists who want to understand their issue better and support their arguments with accurate facts and figures. So this is where you get a lot of great evidence, is from the county profile or the city archive that tells you what's actually happening in that community and how. Community historians needing a picture of not only the objective history of the community, but also of the human history of what's been experienced. Health and human service organizations needing information about the current state of the community, its past history with particular issues and previous prevention efforts or solutions and how they fared. Often these are public records as well. So if you want to see past interventions or projects that happened and what the results and outcomes were, you can go ask for those records, and they can allow you to brainstorm your project. Other people are public officials and policymakers who are engaged in community assessment or trying to determine policy on a particular issue, and they need data to support a position. That's another way to think about it. So how should you use public records and archival data? Well, first you have to determine what kind of information you need. Do you need historical data, demographic data that shows you the lay of the land, health-related data, again, that doesn't have a person's identity tied to it, but just overall, like how many cancer diagnoses are happening in your area? How many doctors with this specialty are in your area? Is it economic data? Is it housing data? Is it sales tax? Is it property taxes? Land use and development? There are all kinds of data out there that you can go find. And then of course, determine where to find the information. You can get quite a bit from the Census Bureau, and they have all kinds of built-in tools that you can go get the data immediately and search and filter on those tools. You can certainly request it from federal, state, or local records and federal, state, or local archives, the archives of media, libraries, museums, universities, and other institutions and organizations. So one thing that I did really kind of as a fun thing is I actually got a library card at the Library of Congress when I traveled recently to Washington, D.C. And then I went up into the Government Documents Archive and I was able to pull the original opinions of Supreme Court decisions on topics I was incredibly interested in. So that was really a fun thing to do, to go kind of go through archives and find original source documents on that. So if you've never been to the Library of Congress, I highly recommend going. It is a work of art as well as a very, very special place. It's the Congress's library, and it houses one of the largest collections of public records in the world. So, and a lot of these pieces of information are available on the web. They've scanned a lot of them, so you can go find that as well. But yeah, you can go to media, museums, universities. I actually have colleagues that go get video footage from ESPN or from HBO, and maybe they're trying to actually get information about a person or an actor or a producer, and that's an archive. So again, you have to be pretty well networked to seek some of that out, because some of them are not public, but archival data is out there. And just brainstorm and be creative on the kind of things that you're looking for, and and ask. I mean, the worst they can tell you is no, but sometimes you'd be surprised at what people are willing to provide you. Make sure you use the information intelligently. You don't want to swamp yourself with information, because you can be buried and overwhelmed really fast. So be really strategic with what you're after and kind of set a good pace for how you're going to sift through all that information. Use community level indicators to tell you more about the reality of a community's circumstances. Examine the social determinants of issues. So you need to come in prepared at what you're about to see. So if you're going to go look at a bunch of tax rolls from a county over a 10-year period, you might want to bring an accountant with you to do that. Use comparisons with similar communities where you can understand the issues in your community and whether they're exceptional or not. So if you have kind of a way to frame it or see if there are differences, then you need something to compare it to. Think about the different ways you can find out what you want to know. So you have to be creative here. What other ways could you demonstrate that this is happening or how it's happening? Okay. And again, sometimes that means you have to kind of brainstorm with people that have the information themselves so that they can help you come up with those clever ways to pull it. So that's a little bit about public archives and public information. Now we're going to jump into conducting needs assessment surveys. So this is an area that is relatively new in social research, and it's a lot of fun to do. I've actually done these myself. So a needs assessment survey is kind of a preset list of questions to be answered. It has a predetermined sample. It's done by interview phone or written response. It's a little bit different than just a survey or an interview itself. And essentially it has results that are tabulated, summarized, distributed, discussed, and used for a program or a project. So essentially, why do you do a survey like this? Well, you want to know about group or community needs. You need to get an honest, objective description. It's also to find out about things or become aware of needs you never knew about, to document your needs, to make sure your future actions are in line with community needs, to garner greater support, or to involve more people in the subsequent action. So essentially, you shouldn't be doing a needs assessment survey when there's really no doubt as to what needs to be done, because essentially you're just wasting everybody's time. When it's urgent to act now, you might not have time to go through all this if there is a need that's imminent and you need to act immediately. When an assessment has been done recently, obviously you don't want to replicate efforts, or when the community would see an assessment as redundant or wasteful. So if you're kind of posturing or managing perception, you don't want to be kind of, the word to me is kind of peacocking around just to kind of showboat, hey, we're doing a project, when, the community is kind of sensitive to it already. So how do you carry out a needs assessment survey? So you have to identify reasons for choosing to do the survey and identify goals, provide the time and the people, who you're going to question, what's going to be asked, and who will ask the questions. But essentially, the kind of result you get is going to provide a community map or a graphing of needs across the community, and they're different than any one person's answers. So this is how a personal survey is different from a needs assessment survey. So it's actually describing a much larger group rather than an individual survey respondent. So you need to create a draft of the survey, try out the survey on a test group, which I would also recommend for any personal survey as well. Revise the survey. You'd be surprised at the feedback you get on your questions and your pick list choices of what works and what doesn't. Then once you have a fully finalized draft of your survey, you want to administer it, tabulate your results, interpret them, plan future actions, implement your actions, and then repeat your assessment. Because that usually generates a new set of questions that you want to answer and get feedback on. So again, needs assessment over a community is asking questions that really can demonstrate larger needs of the group whole rather than individual experiences. We're going to jump into a little bit more formal one. This is SWOT. You've probably heard this acronym before. If you've been working for a period of time, it comes up in organizational culture quite often. SWOT really stands for strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And it gives you a top-down, full, comprehensive view of what's going on. It's very, very conclusive, and it's also very expansive. So what is a SWOT analysis? When should you use one? Well, SWOT, and we do this in grants and just within organizations to kind of get information. It guides you to identify positives and negatives inside your organization, which are strengths and weaknesses, and outside of it in the in the external environment. So it looks at opportunities out there beyond your reach and threats, things that might kind of create obstacles in your success. So developing a full awareness of your situation can help with both strategic planning and decision making. So let's go through SWOT in a little more detail. When do you use a SWOT? Well, you want to explore different possibilities to problems because maybe the answer is not completely obvious and you need to kind of think about other ways to go about it. You'd want to use it when you're trying to make decisions for your initiative. Maybe you have an idea of the activities you want to do and the interventions necessary, but you're not certain about it. It's good to determine where change is possible. It's going to reveal some new areas you maybe had not considered before, and it can help you adjust and refine plans mid-course. So SWOT is a good mid-year activity for a grant to say, okay, let's regroup here, let's see where we're at, and reveal anything that we have lost track of or didn't consider. So really, what are the elements of a SWOT analysis? Let's go through these in a little bit more detail. So SWOT analysis focuses on strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. So essentially, you're going to ask participants to answer these very simple questions. What are the strengths and weaknesses of our group, our community, or our effort we're doing? And what are the opportunities and threats facing it? And you're going to be surprised at the kinds of answers that people give. Sometimes some people are very easy and able to, are easily and able to articulate strengths and weaknesses, but opportunities and threats are a little more abstract. So sometimes you have to be prepared with some prompts or some dialogues, and you can even do a SWOT analysis in a focus group setting where people get to brainstorm together if they get a little stumped or stuck on one area. If a looser structure helps you brainstorm, you can group the positives and negatives together to think broadly about your organization and its external environment. So sometimes you have to think about things in a light that is more pleasant or maybe unpleasant, and it's easier to kind of group it like that. So you can talk about strengths in a positive manner in terms of assets and resources you have. You can also think about it in terms of opportunities, right? And really great outcomes that come from those opportunities, and also prospects, right? Negatives you can kind of group in terms of obviously weaknesses. Nobody likes to talk about those. Limitations, restrictions, obstacles, threats, challenges, things that derail us. So sometimes kind of organizing SWOT into positives and negatives can really kind of untangle people's tongues when they feel a little bit challenged. Below is another option or a third option for structuring your SWOT analysis, which may be appropriate for a larger initiative that requires detailed planning. So we call this the TOES matrix, okay? It's adapted from Fred David's strategic management text. So he uses TOES where he kind of groups things in different quadrants and combines them together. So if you need a lot more detail and you need to kind of think through things in different ways, you can actually kind of put these in these quadrants. So first we have strengths and opportunities. So we call it opportunity strengths strategies. Use the strengths to take advantage of opportunities. In the quadrant to the right of that, you have opportunity weaknesses, strategies to overcome weaknesses by taking advantage of opportunities, right? So that's kind of a really cool way to think about it. And then below we have threat strength, or strategies or strengths that we can use to avoid threats. So this is a little more pleasing because then we don't feel so completely hopeless in identifying how we're going to fail. We can kind of come at it with some solutions. And then finally, the last one, threat weakness, or strategies to minimize weaknesses and avoid threats altogether. So we feel a little more prepared to deal with challenge or obstacle. So again, this is kind of a really fun way to get after some of the celebration of how well things are going and deal with anxiety that may arise when things are not going terribly well. David also gives an example that the Campbell Soup Company did that stressed financial goals, but it also illustrates how you can pair the items within a SWOT grid to develop some strategies. So they kind of did the TOES method, and they were talking about opportunity strengths, opportunity weaknesses, threat strengths, and threat weaknesses. And I'm not going to go through this in detail, but I wanted to include this so you could kind of get an idea of some of the things that they came up with in doing a SWOT for their organization. Okay. Listing your internal factors. These are the strengths and weaknesses. So these are some general areas to get you thinking, and this is how you can prompt or probe your group to really get thinking. So areas to consider are things like human resources, staff, volunteers, board members, and target population. You can also talk about physical resources like your location, your space, building, and equipment. Talk about the financial, grants, funding agencies, budget, other sources of income, your activities and processes, the programs you run, the systems you employ, your past experiences, your building blocks for learning and success, and your reputation in the community. That can definitely be a strength or a weakness. When you're listing the external factors, things that are kind of out of our control, that we aren't directly involved in, those are our opportunities and threats. Those are forces and facts that your group does not control. It includes future trends in your field or the culture. So maybe that new technologies are coming out and you have to think about how you're going to adapt to those or embrace them. It could be the economy, local, national, or international forces, funding sources like foundations, donors, and legislatures that you don't have direct control over. Demographics, changes in the age, race, gender, culture of those that you serve in your area. The physical environment, is your building in a growing part of town? Is the bus company cutting routes? What's happening physically around you that's growing or shrinking or changing? What about legislation, like new federal requirements that make your job harder or easier, or emerging bills to keep your eye on? And then certainly local, national, or international events or news stories and coverage that are going to influence some of the things that you do as an organization. So how do you actually create a SWOT analysis? Who develops the SWOT? When and where do you do it? And then how do you develop the analysis? We're going to wrap with these three things. So steps for conducting the SWOT. You have to have the who in place, right? Designate a leader or group facilitator just like you would in a focus group. And then of course you want to designate a recorder to back up the leader, especially if your group size is large, because it's going to be hard for the leader to document everything. Usually the person facilitating and recording are two different people. Introduce the SWOT method and its purpose in your organization so that people know what to expect. Let all participants introduce themselves. It's a form of validating everyone that's there and engaging them. Have each group designate a recorder, direct them to create SWOT analysis if you're going to do kind of group separation, and then maybe reconvene as a larger group if you're going to do breakout sessions. You can reconvene the group at the agreed upon time to share the results of what you come up with. You can discuss and record the results, and then of course provide and prepare a written summary of the SWOT analysis to give to participants so they can kind of again feel like they accomplished something in that analysis, and they can kind of sift through all the ideas. So how do you use your SWOT analysis? Well, you use it to identify the issues or problems you intend to change, to set or reaffirm your goals, and create an action plan. So this is a great thing to do as you're preparing a new project or program or seeking a grant. SWOT is a great preparatory method, but don't discount it only on that end. It's a great way to see if what you're doing is working and if you lost track of anything halfway through a program, plan, or project. So it has a lot of utility. SWOT is one of my favorite things to do within an organization. In summary, it's really a realistic recognition of the weaknesses and threats that exist for your effort, and that's the first step to countering them with a robust set of strategies that build upon your strengths and opportunities. Again, using that TOES method from David. A SWOT analysis identifies the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats to assist you in making your strategic plans and your decisions. All right, we're almost finished. We're going to go into creating and using community report cards. This one's kind of fun. You thought report cards were limited to school, huh? Nope, we use them other places too. So essentially, a community report card is basically a tool for reporting progress or a lack of progress toward a community goal. So it's a scoring system or an assessment. It can serve to document and direct the progress toward that goal. And really all it does is just send a message. The people who issue and receive it must be the actual agents of change if it's going to be useful or effective. It's just basically providing a one-time, one-place assessment so that we can take measurement, take stock in what's happening, and then move forward. Why might you create a community report card? Well, because we're socialized to understand report cards. We've dealt with them our whole lives because pretty much everyone has had some kind of schooling experience where they've been graded, assessed, and measured in some way. So it's very easy to reach. It also has the selection of a few key issues or categories and helps focus attention for problem solving. So it's kind of short, simple, sweet, direct. It also is effectively communicating a general message, yet allowing for more specific levels of detail so that you can kind of drive more solutions. It communicates the facts of a situation. I mean, when facts are facts, it is what it is. It can help focus everyone, get away from opinions or armchair thinking or assumptions about what's actually happening. And you can do this with your own group or a wider audience. It helps you interpret the facts a little bit to raise awareness of an issue to the general public in a more specific audience, and to also to define your goals. It's also a great way to do a needs section in a grant, right? Or to demonstrate why you might want to go forward with a project because your report card is saying it's really necessary. It creates a lot of buy-in. So you might create a community report card to prompt some action, to influence policy, to help make a case for a new initiative, to be accountable to those you serve, and to hold others accountable, right? So it's a metric that we can all see and all understand at the same time. What are the common elements of a community report card? Usually there's a statement of purpose so everyone understands why we did it. And then of course the report card itself, you need to have explanations of chosen indicators and benchmarks and why you're doing that so that it's not abstract and strange as to why are you showing us this? What does this have to do with what we're after? You need to have some kind of objective measuring system that can show progress towards stated goals. Don't overlook reporting the good news. People have very negative experiences with report cards. They can be very positive to show really great progress. So don't think they're all negative. They can be very, very positive, very exciting. So how do you create a community report card? Well, again, you have to decide on the purpose, and it feels like that's like a broken record. I always repeat myself. What is your purpose? What is your purpose? What is your purpose? Clarity, accuracy, going back to those critical thinking skills, they really do matter. So what's your purpose in producing a report card? Form a working group to determine what you want to communicate to whom and for what reason. Set a timeline for your project that relates to your goals. How long are you going to take to develop it? Determine the essential actors and actions of who needs to pull the data and measure things. Identify those indicators related to your goals. Keep them short and sweet. One recommendation I'm going to make here is if you have to kind of pick and choose how much to share, people tend to remember things in terms of threes. So if you kind of say, here are 3 main takeaways, or these are 3 talking points, or 3 indicators of success, people can keep track of that in a reasonable memory bank. But once you get into 5, 7, 9, or 27, they're going to lose track of a lot of those. So grouping things in 3 is a really good strategy if you want people to remember what you're sharing. Identify benchmarks for each indicator that are meaningful and measurable, right? So we need to make sure that they're easy to observe and that we can kind of have some scale or system by which to understand them. Compile the data for your indicators and benchmarks, translate them into a grade based on your predetermined system. And again, we've done this, for example, with infrastructure. How are the bridges and roads in our community? Are they like a C or an A or a B or an F? You know, so people kind of intrinsically understand average, mediocre, good, exceptional, failing, deteriorating. They have a sense of a grade scale. But you need to also articulate that grade scale in case people are making assumptions about what excellent is versus what very good is or what average is. So make it in a predetermined system that's easy to follow. And then, of course, produce the report card, print electronic, disseminate it, get it into the hands of people so they can start seeing it. How do you use it? Publicize and distribute the report card. Tell people what they can do, because you want to, if they get excited about it or motivated, you want to kind of give them next steps or action items. This is what to do after this, or this is how to engage. Continue and call attention to the important grades and the actions that you want them to prompt. And then update the report card from time to time. It's a great way to measure progress over time. So in wrapping things up, this is not the end all be all with a research methodology in the community or using research to document outcomes in practice. There are so many different ways to do research. These are just a few others I want to mention. Geographic information systems, content analysis. You can look at social media, video footage, print, and look for patterns and themes there. There's ethnography. There are many, many others. And again, you'll learn about other research methodology in your research methods classes as you finish the major. So I implore you to take these classes seriously. They're skill-based. They're going to give you strategies and actual skills you can throw at future employment and future study that are really meaningful, that really drive forward exceptional outcomes and important activities and impacts in your community, in your organization, and in your own life. So embrace research. It's fascinating. And hopefully you've learned how relevant and how valuable your degree is in this regard in our social world. Thanks for listening. We'll see you later.